All right, welcome to the Church Dropout Podcast. My name is Alan. I'm the host. Church Dropout is a podcast. We talk about issues, topics, and teachings related to faith, life, and culture in ways that are sometimes funny, sometimes serious, but always insightful. If you have not already, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below. Keep the conversation moving forward. Something that I have been wanting to talk about for a while, especially related to the climate we find ourselves in with politics and government and power in general, and how Christians, how so-called Jesus followers are responding to and calling for, acting in certain situations that to me just don't reflect the character of Jesus. And the first thing that kind of came to my mind was the interesting interaction, with Pilate between Barabbas, Jesus, and himself. And when he asked the crowd, whom should he let go? And we know the crowd chose Barabbas. And it's baffling to me, right? How and why they would choose Barabbas, right? Jesus was, an innocent person who was being condemned to death. He did no wrong. He did peace. He brought about peace. People are aware of his healings, the work that he had done up until that point. Barabbas was an insurrectionist. He was a revolutionary, a murderer. He fought, physically to overthrow the Roman government. Why in the world would they want to free Barabbas? But I think it's quite obvious. And I think, there's some similarities to what's going on here today. I mean, most of the Jews around that time were not looking for a Messiah. They were looking for a king that would overthrow the Roman Empire and that their enemies would become their footstool. And they were looking at this redemption or salvation as a physical one, that the Messiah would come in and physically, make the Jews the ruler. And bring justice to all the injustices that had been happening in the world. And so when Jesus enters in, he's not at all what people think he ought to be, right? He's not confrontational. He's not physical in terms of, using violence. He says things that are totally contradictory to what they would have thought, he would have said, like, turn the other cheek or love your enemies. These various teachings that Jesus had were really contradictory to what, they wanted to see. They thought that the Messiah would come in and rescue them from the oppression that they were currently in. Now, Barabbas, around that same time, was an insurrectionist, like I said, who was fighting physically for, against the oppression of the Jews, and was willing to go as far as do whatever was necessary in order to achieve that, including hurting people, if that was the case. And much times it was the case. And he was a zealot, and it landed him in jail or prison, right? And we get to the place where Pilate is like, listen, on this day, it's tradition that we release, one criminal. And here you have on one side, you have Barabbas, and on the other side, you got Jesus. And the people are called to make a choice. The crowd is called to make a choice between Barabbas, who's guilty of being an insurrectionist and all that stuff, and then we have Jesus, who's not guilty of any crime, but demonstrating nothing but peace and love and harmony. And we see the crowd angrily, excitingly, emphatically, I guess is the better way of putting it, chose Barabbas. Even to Pilate's surprise, they chose to let Barabbas go. And it's interesting. Why? Why did they choose to let Barabbas go and not let Jesus go? And I think in part it's for the same reasons today that we, in some senses, choose Barabbas over Jesus. And that is because of power. We see Jesus as weak. We see his way of life as weak, that his principles don't align with what our natural disposition or desire is, which is to fight. He shows a totally different way to deal with evil and the problems in the world. And he chooses this path that's paved with love. He chooses this path that is forgiving and loving, and he chooses a different way. And the kingdom that he was ushering in was not necessarily a kingdom that was going to overtake the physical oppressors or the physical kingdom of the oppressors, but he was creating a new reality that would overtake the world one day. That would be a new reality where injustice is no longer can no longer happen and will not no longer happen, where every tear will be wiped away, every injustice will be made right. And yet we still choose power. The church today, I believe, is choosing Barabbas. We're choosing the one who will give us the immediate victory, at least we feel that way, who will overtake injustices by force, that'll fight back, that will exercise power. We're choosing Barabbas. And I think we ought to be very, very careful of the Jesus that we're choosing. I feel like we are making a graven mistake, especially when it comes to politics, on how we view God's work in the world and how we view, honestly, Christianity and the uniqueness that Christianity has as it fits into the world. It's the very foundation of Christianity is countercultural. The way Jesus conquered death was with his own. The way Jesus overturned injustices was to be selfless and to give, even to those who treated him harshly. And so I think the church today is infatuated with power and even in some sense wants to see a physical kingdom transpire here in America, sort of a Zion in America. And unfortunately, the church is choosing Barabbas instead of Jesus. And I think we need to return to our first love, and we need to choose Jesus, and we need to operate in the way of Jesus. And that gets complicated and sticky in the world we live in. There's a lot to be thought through and how to respond and how to act. But the reality is that we need to wrestle with what Jesus has called us to. And he hasn't called us to an insurrection. He hasn't called us to be revolutionaries. He hasn't called us to be zealots. He called us to be followers of him. He called us to love one another as he loved us. He called us to love our enemies. He called us to meekness, not power. He called us to serve and not be served. And this is what the church stands on. This is what makes the Church of the Living Christ unique. And so, again, we're choosing Barabbas when we ought to be choosing Jesus. And I think this is a question that we need to ask ourselves. This is a question that we need to really challenge ourselves with and see where we lie on this path. So anyway, just a quick word Thank you so much for tuning into the Church Dropout. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below. Keep the conversation moving forward.